Here are 3 cups with texture. Later on in the demo, I'll show you how I added this texture. But first I want to start by showing you some different tools and techniques that you can use to create texture. And there's such an infinite variety of textures that you can do on a surface. Some are going to be more abrasive to your form. They might distort the form a little bit. And some are going to be more careful, precise things that you do. Anything you find around the house in nature can become a tool to make texture. You can also make your own texture tools out of clay. And I'm going to start by showing you some of those that you can make because they're going to take a little bit more time, a little bit more foresight to allow those things to stiffen up and become hard enough to use. Ideally, fire them, but you can use these kinds of tools bone dry. Just make a little ball of clay, smooth it out pretty good, and then you just poke little holes in it. Here I'm using the end of a brush. Once you've covered the entire thing in holes, you let it stiffen up, and then you can take this ball and on your surface you can then just roll it around. Maybe you make a variety of sizes, small ones for getting in little nooks and crannies, big ones for covering a lot of area. So it's all about working smart, not hard here. On a bigger surface, that might look like this. And if you have a glaze that really breaks on those high points, changes color based on texture, you could get a lot of really fun color going on. You could have this surface and you could add texture on top of it, just using a rib there. Maybe you want some visual breaks in that surface, some spots where that texture can kind of stop. So maybe you get a carving tool. Here's another rough hand-built planter with that little dot making tool and then carved into a little bit to interrupt that surface, paddled a little bit to create some interesting lines there. Here I have a bone dry piece of a coil that was sitting out left over from building some other projects. And what I can do is kind of shave it down and make it a shape that tapers in a little bit at the edges, because if I roll it, the idea is that I'm going to roll it on a surface. These edges are going to kind of get in the way. So if I bring those edges down, now because these edges taper in a little bit, they're not going to kind of gouge out the edges of the piece that I'm texturing. And you'll see what I'm talking about in just a moment. Now I could carve any variety of texture in here, maybe some really specific sort of design. Maybe you want to do like an ankh or some kind of thing on there that you're going to roll into the surface to repeat a shape. Or I'm thinking I want to do sort of a wood grain, watery, kind of wavy type of a texture. So I can get a tool, just my trimming tool will work fine. And then I can start carving into it. And I want these lines next to each other all to kind of line up and repeat. It's good to test things before you put these textures on a surface of something that you worked hard on, like a pot or something. So here's our tool we just made, and let's give it a try. Pushing it down and rolling it. Here I have a tool with an ankh that I just carved into it. Same thing, just a piece of coil that I had left over. And roll it in. Here I took a piece of clay and I rounded out the top of it, and then I used a wooden modeling tool with kind of a pointy end. You could even cut that with the utility knife to get the shape you want. And now I have a big scale stamp. This one's fired. Again, you could use it bone dry. It'll last longer if it's fired. Here I have a little piece of a popsicle stick that I cut with a utility knife to make the negative space between scales. So if I want to make some scales, if I want to be more precise, maybe I have a really fragile shape that I want to add some nice even scales to without messing up the whole shape. I can stack these scales one on top of another. My favorite popsicle stick tool with the cut flattened end. And then here, cut that end, sanded it. You can sand it on concrete if you don't have sandpaper. But this can be a nice tool to create some real clean, crisp lines. Making sure to really press into that surface to create some depth, to create some change in the depth of that surface. Maybe you want to make sort of a geometric pattern. Maybe you're imagining it's like metal paneling where some of these panels kind of slip under and over other panels. Maybe I use the end of a pencil. Here I have a fork, a little Trader Joe's sample fork, which is one of my favorite scoring tools. Here's a pumice stone. At drugstores, usually they sell pumice stones or imitation pumice stones for exfoliating, and that can make some really cool kind of pocked, lumpy texture. Even just a rock, if you find a good chunky rock, then maybe you want to give that a border. Contrast is always really nice. Your trimming tool. The wooden modeling tool. Maybe I'll go back this one. And you don't want it to be too chunky. These little parts sticking out could be trouble, so you could soften them, stick them back in there. A cap. A bolt. Screw. Toothbrush. Chopstick. Bring back my little ball tool. dot tool. Rib. Any object can be a tool. It looks interesting now, and it'll look even more interesting with glaze on it, especially like a semi-transparent one that reacts to texture, a glaze that breaks over texture. You can use underglaze, do washes, use oxides and do washes. You can dry brush. There's also infinite ways to bring out that texture. I've got my cup here, and I did some texture experiments. I like these circles that my eraser made, the eraser of my pencil. I like some of these grooves, but maybe something more organic and subtle. And then I was thinking about breaking it up with some lines, maybe add a little bit of kind of division between textures. So I have a bit of an idea. It doesn't need to be too complicated. I mean, you don't want to work hard to destroy your piece. You just want to add something nice that's going to make it feel complete and unique and interesting. So you get your cup and check the moisture level. This does feel a little bit dry. You might need to spray it. Maybe you have some paper and then you have some water and you dip it all the way in the water so that it's pretty wet. Wet paper, kind of squeeze out excess moisture, and you can wrap it onto the surface of your cup. Maybe you wrap it all the way around there to kind of reactivate it, but you want it to be, somewhat workable, somewhat pliable. For me, you don't want it like wet, but you want it to accept that texture. So you can see it's still like a little bit pliable, but it's pretty leather hard. So I'm going to divide it a little bit, just break it up. And I'm going to just make these marks. I'll get rid of them later. Doesn't need to be absolutely perfect. It's a handmade cup, and my surface will maintain that handmade quality. Here I'm just creating kind of a division line. I don't like hard edges, so I'm going to take away some of the edge here. I could use this tool, but I get a little more precision with my popsicle stick tool. Soften that edge. Don't want any hard edges. This should feel nice in your hand. Nothing sharp on it. If you mess up, you can just rub it with your finger and get rid of that undesired mark. Now I've got kind of 3 sections, 1, 2, 3, where I can add different textures, or maybe I'll do a different one in each area. Let's start by making some of those lines I was thinking of here. And you know what, maybe they won't be so organic. Maybe this is such a straight cup. Maybe I'll just do some kind of straight lines coming down. sort of fluting. And you can work, a variety of different moisture levels. It just is going to take a little more effort to carve in, push in if it's a little drier. Maybe I'll make it into 4 areas. Or I could divide it. Maybe I divide it like along here, and I can do more of that texture here. It's good when texture repeats itself. It can give a sense of unity to your form. The textures relate to each other. They lead your eye around the piece. Texture creates visual interest. And in this case, because it's a functional object, it actually has a tactile interest where you can actually touch it and feel that, experience that texture. And it just makes it a more compelling object. And when you repeat textures, it kind of brings your eye around the piece, brings your fingers around the piece. It makes it feel more like a unified whole. With any piece of art, you want to create enough unity to make it feel like all the parts belong together, but you want to have enough contrast to create visual interest. And then here, maybe I'll go more random with my dots. Maybe I need to get my hand in there and support it a little bit more. I like these dots, but I think they need more variety within them. Maybe I want some small dots too. So I got my chopstick here. Yeah, I think I like that variety. So I'm sort of creating a rhythm here. Rhythm with variation. Like a song with a drum beat. It's got rhythm. But that rhythm, it's not just going to be the same thing. It's going to be somewhat predictable, but there's going to be some fills in there. There's going to be some change-ups in it. So it's going to have rhythm and variation. I could add some texture on these triangles, but it's nice to kind of give your eye a place to rest, a place to stop. I think that looks good. Oh, my handle's a little crooked. I've got my tripod cup here, and it's getting a little stiff, so this time I'll sponge it a little bit. Get some water on there just so it accepts the texture a little bit. I'll get that water on there and just let it sit for a little bit and soak in. I like this one. I think the clay's gonna respond a little differently because my slab was kind of wet when I did that. The screw is kind of cool. Maybe I'll add some screw. Or do I like my pumice stone? I don't want to do too much. Maybe I'll do the pumice stone. I'll break it up a little bit, and then I'll do some screws too. This time I'll break it up a little more organically. And do I want that texture? Here's a line to consider. How do I want it to change there? Maybe it has a different texture down here on the bottom. That could be cool. More organic line coming up to the top. How does it interact with the top? Maybe kind of the way it interacted with the bottom. That's kind of fun. I like that shape. Maybe I'll play around with that idea of shapes. And those shapes will have texture on them. You're kind of exercising your aesthetic sensibilities as you're working, making decisions. You come into it with a plan. That plan can change depending on what the cup is telling you it wants. You want to have the flexibility to really change things if they don't feel right. You want to be able to respond to what your instincts tell you, what the cup tells you. You don't have to divide it up like that. You could just texture the whole thing. Got my pumice stone. You could just use a rock or something. So I finished doing the texture and I brought it all the way up to the edges. And then I wasn't sure, how I wanted to handle, like, if the texture was going to kind of stick out or if it was going to tuck in more. And I decided I would just kind of define the edge, like redefine the edge, uh, because I don't want it to have too much dimensionality to it. So I'm going to just use a pencil. Dull pencil makes a nice line, and I'll just kind of come back and redefine that edge that got a little schmutzed when I was texturing, just to make it feel really intentional and specific. Get rid of any little crumbly things that want to stick up here. But bone dry is a good time to sand it, and you can get rid of any of this kind of rough edge that happens. Green scrubby pad, little like Brillo pad, can do the job. I like what's going on there. There's a little bit of a open space to give your eye a rest, but maybe I want to add a little bit more interest. I can use the screw. Think about where I want to put it. I want to put it at the top. I think that's kind of fun, like right there, nice and assertively deep. That's kind of cool. And maybe another one down here to echo it. Kind of relate to each other. Same thing here. Maybe I add some more dots in between. Maybe I don't like that. That's probably good enough right there. Check it, see if I distorted it too much while I was working on it. And yeah, when it's bone dry, I can get some of the crumbs off there. I think I like that. On this cup, I'll just do one texture all over it. So I'll use this tool, wooden modeling tool. And I like some of those just kind of lines. Maybe I just keep working it with lines at an angle. Give it sort of a twisting, rotating kind of feel. Think about how do they interact with the lip. I think that looks okay. They're kind of dodging the lip just a little bit. They all sort of start at the same place. Maybe your hand's getting kind of tired holding it. You could even put it on a sponge or a towel or something and work on it that way. I'll start these from that base. Have these lines kind of meet up with each other. They look like they're all just kind of a continuation with the same sort of directional dominance, directional flow. And that's pretty good, but often it looks better when there's more complexity to it. So maybe I'll just run over those same marks some more just to make sure they're really incorporated into that surface. Doesn't look tentative, it looks specific and deliberate. Maybe they do go all the way to the top. Smooth the lip a little bit, make sure that that lip's gonna feel nice on your lip. A lot of these crumbs will come off. You can kind of flick them off in the bone dry stage. You can also use a chip brush. I like to have a chip brush and just cut the end off with some scissors so it's nice and stiff. And that can be good for some cleanup. There's my 3 cups, all with texture. I'll get some glaze on there that interacts with the surface, something semi-transparent or something that breaks or changes color with the variety in surface, and that will enhance it even further. I could stain it with underglaze, oxide, something like that. Even stain it with a glaze and bring out that surface. Maybe even break up different glazes on different areas. It's really nice when the surface helps to dictate the way something is glazed. So you want to use different colors. Well, one color here, another color here. Surface and color interacting is a good idea. Now that I'm done, I can leave these to dry. The best thing to do is to loosely drape them in plastic like that, and that way they'll dry kind of slow. Air can still get in there. Leave it like that for a few days, a week. Take the plastic off, let it dry for another few days or a week. They'll be ready to fire.